TV, film, and other media outlets are under criticism for their choices in producing violent and mature content. The choices made by major media companies and organizations raises many questions. Why are people who commit violent crimes against society a subject of commercialization? How does this commercialization of people who commit violent crimes affect and influence society? How does this influence others who may commit violent acts of their own? Why are people genuinely fascinated by violent crime, and how has the media helped to desensitize these violent acts? James Hamilton once said in his novel Channeling Violence, "The recognition that television violence is fundamentally a problem of externalities, and economics suggests that solutions should focus on the individual incentives faced by viewers, producers, programmers, and advertisers. Just as the optimal amount of pollution from society's perspective is not zero, the optimal amount of violence in television is not zero. Analysis of television violence should focus on the marginal benefits and costs involved in attempts to influence how violence is portrayed in the media. How have society's concerns regarding violent and mature content been handled by the media companies in the past? Not well. In the 1990s, media outlets started including ratings with their program, so viewers could be warned ahead of time of the nature of the content they were about to consume. These ratings, PG, G, MA, etc., stand as an example of lowering the cost of viewers when consuming content. What do I mean by lowering costs? Well, economics is all about the relationship between consumers and producers. To think from an economics perspective, media violence shared by producers leads to an unwanted effect on society. That negative externality is the influence violent media has on crime rates and the mental health effects it can have on its viewers. By lowering the cost of consuming this type of content, producers can in turn earn more viewers. Just as pollution, companies who take into consideration the amount of pollution they're creating and come up with solutions to limit this makes them a more desirable brand and household name for their consumers. This was a step in the right direction, but not enough to ease the public's concerns about the content they and their children are consuming. These ratings face criticism for not being specific enough about the level and type of violence and mature content, and was changed to also give warnings on violence, sexual situations, language, and suggestive dialogue. Labeling the appropriate shows and films with the appropriate labels acts as a guide for viewers, but not necessarily a deterrent. If anything, it can actually draw more viewers in. Let me explain. Netflix is a current and effective example of how media platforms are responding to this incentive to release violent programs. In the same way Netflix's built-in autoplay feature, which automatically starts the next episode, violent programming is a way for Netflix to stay as successful as they are. Also, with the Netflix algorithm, it makes these types of shows more accessible to the viewer by making it easier to find similarly violent and popular shows. Netflix takes advantage of the need to have warning labels and uses them as search tags. As said in an article titled "Does Netflix Have a Killer Problem?" written by the Washington Post, Netflix is also quietly capitalizing on another form of content. More than other entertainment outlets, a number of Netflix's hit shows spotlight gruesome violence, often committed against women, according to viewership statistics and industry experts. And Netflix is both more popular, some 60 million subscribers, and more intensely watched in all rooms of the house, often multiple episodes at a time, than traditional television, raising worries among media violence experts. Netflix closely guards its viewership data, so it is hard to make direct comparisons to broadcast and cable networks. But in the data Netflix does release, there are strong hints of the disproportionate role of violence in its top offerings. The article goes on to talk about some of the most popular TV shows and film on Netflix, including 13 Reasons Why, Making a Murderer, and one of its newer releases, You. Netflix as a company states that it wouldn't be in the company's interest to promote only one genre, which they don't, but because Netflix bases so much on technology, when something works, you're going to have a lot of different versions of that same thing. Hence, the overwhelming majority of violent shows and films. Shouldn't Netflix and other large media companies be held responsible to set a good example when it comes to media violence? How can they put the right foot forward in tackling this issue? While it sounds easy enough, lessening the amount of violent programming probably won't work. As said, by James Potter in his book, The 11 Myths of Media Violence, this myth is misleading because it limits our function of media businesses, thinking of only one function, satisfying existing demand. It tries to hide the other function, creating and reinforcing that demand. While these economic principles that were talked about in Hamilton's Channeling Violence do apply, it cannot be considered the only reason for media violence. He also states, context is important because it provides people with information about how the violence should be interpreted. Therefore, our primary concern about the influence of media violence should be focused on the context instead of frequency. How those who commit violent acts are treated, the consequences, or lack thereof, which is all too frequent on the screen, characters receive is very important when considering how violence will be interpreted by its viewers. While we're on the topic of context and interpretation, should the comedic violence that is often present in children's shows also be viewed as a concern? Why isn't it already? How should the violence present in children's shows be interpreted by its viewers? Children are constant consumers by nature and are growing up in a new era of technology. With more screens, kids are subject to all types of media at a very young age. With this, they are also subject to violent images at a very young age. The American Academy of Child and Adolescent Psychiatry, the AACAP, states that while TV violence is not the only cause of aggression or violent behavior, it is clearly a significant factor. The AACAP also shares the dangers of exposure to violent content early in life, desensitization to violence, and turning towards violence to solve problems. Let me give an example of context. The differences in characteristics of Batman and Spider-Man when it comes to the morals and acts of violence. Batman is notoriously feared by the people of Gotham City, and serves as a vigilante more than a traditional superhero. Batman serves as an example that violence and fear is a means of power and respect. Spider-Man, on the other hand, makes a point to never kill his enemies. He is favored by New York City and is an icon to many young children. Spider-Man does whatever it takes to do the right thing, even if he pays in the process.
Vengeance. It's him. Poor Peter. Too weak to send me home to die.
No. I just want to kill you myself.
Attaboy.
Using violence in a way to show the strength in character and using violence to show power through submission are two very different concepts and need to be taken into account. There is a way to do violence right, so to Netflix and other major media companies, I say, with great power comes great responsibility.